A study of the map of Asia will reveal that vast, comparatively unexplored area, which extends to Chinese Xinjiang and Turkestan, across an incredible wilderness, desert, finally end in the Nejd and Hejaz, what we call today Saudi Arabia. This distance to ancient man must have been an incredible mystery. We know that 7th and 9th centuries A.D., Chinese scholars and monks crossed this vast expanse. Some of them were gone 12 years on the journey. And there was very little in this uncharted wilderness of comfort or security or even hope of survival. But by this long and dangerous path, the silk of China was brought to gladden the hearts of the pharaohs of Egypt and to make fine raiment for the emperors of Rome. It was interesting to realize that in this great region with rare oases, a kind of route was set up with posting stations. Every few hundred miles is a village or some place of rest. In most cases, the goods was unloaded in the backs of camels and given to another section of the caravan to carry on. Those who started in China were not likely to reach North Africa. But they did this entire process by relays. But along this same mysterious road, a certain exchange of ideas occurred. The various stations were eager of news. They lived alone, far from the unfolding processes of world civilization. They wanted tidings of the great civilizations that skirted their desolate path. And by degrees, the communication was certainly established between Peking, Constantinople, Alexandria, and possibly Rome. This communication line was very thin and was broken many times. But along this same road later, Nestorian Christians, seeking to escape the persecutions of their more orthodox brethren, fled into the wilderness and reached Peking in the 2nd or 3rd century of the Christian era. So while the going was hard, the road was dangerous, it was heavily traveled. And perhaps this thin thread of communication explains a great many mysteries relating to the parallels between certain cultural practices of Europe and Asia. We know that in seeking for the origin or the beginning of certain rather common stories and traditions, we are defeated. We do not know where this great structure of legendary began. We do not know whether certain accounts were carried from Europe to Asia or from Asia to Europe. We do know, however, the same stories rose in both areas. But perhaps it is better and wiser to believe the Silk Road and the caravan route is the bridge that in those times bound the two hemispheres of the earth together. In any event, about the 5th century A.D., something was added to the pattern of world legendary. At this time, there began to emerge the dim shadow of the world hero. This world hero was something different from the traditions that had come down from earlier times. In Egypt, we know that the gods fought in the sky above the armies of the pharaohs. We know that in Greece, Athena guarded the city of which she was the patroness. There were many accounts of divine intercessions, spiritual beings coming to the aid of men. These accounts, however, are rather different in spirit from those that rose somewhat later. But about the 5th century A.D., we began to see the rise of the concept of man as hero. That the hero of the world was not a divine being, but in some way an immortal mortal, a demigod, bound strangely to the earth and to the human background of things, yet rising above this mortal heritage to some strange and awful destiny. Perhaps the most simple approach to this is to tell something of some of these world heroes and what they meant in their own time. Most of them were associated with a line of literary production that paralleled Scripture, but was never quite scriptural. We have the Nordic sagas, the wonderful legend of the Volsungs, or Siegfried or Sigurd, the hero of the world. And in Western culture, I suppose, the most complete expression of the folk hero was Siegfried. Here we have a man of destiny, a human being upon whom depended even the fate of the gods. For it was through Siegfried that Wotan hoped to restore the reign of the celestial beings over the earth. The world hero, as Sigurd or Siegfried, was a mortal, immortal in several ways. He was strong, he was wise, he was possessed of wonderful insight. He could speak the language of birds and animals. He could slay the great dragon that guarded the treasure of the Nibelung. And yet, he was strangely fallible. For in almost every instance, the hero died. The hero perished by betrayal. by assassination, by the corruption of his followers. Always there was the vulnerable point, the vulnerable spot. Always there was the heel of Achilles. In the case of Siegfried, he was drugged into forgetfulness by his own wife, leading to the final act of this great saga or drama, in which the whole hope of the gods and of men perished in the house of the Gibbetu. All these legends, therefore, are wonderful and sad. We remember the wonderful story of Charlemagne and his 12 paladins, the song of Roland, the death of the hero, whose last message was carried for the trumpet call. We can also bring to mind from our own childish reading the great story of the Arthurian cycle, the good King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. That final day, so mortally wounded, Arthur was carried away on a black barge, the mysterious Vale of Avalon. You remember the story of Parsifal, the wonderful, guileless Queen of the Grail, Lohengrin, the Swan Knight, who came to rescue the maiden in distress. Always this wonderful cycle stories. Stories that were sung by the troubadours, carried about for the minstrels from one end of Europe to another. In each area the stories were reshaped a little to fit the local circumstances. But the thread goes on. But for 500 years these stories dominated the mental and social life of Europe. They slowly faded away as though they had never been. And all that is left of them are the fragmentary tales remembered in the works for children. All these stories have to do with this strange but profound concept that the fate of mankind rests upon the production out of humanity of the world hero. This world hero must stand as a kind of hostage for the rest of men. If this hero attains, all is saved. If this hero fails, all is lost. So we know that such a cycle probably originated among mystic societies of one kind or another. Societies like the Minnesang of High German, and later the Meistersingers of Nuremberg. These stories were not originally written down. There is no ancient and original manuscript of them. Very few early examples have ever been placed in writing at all. And it was long before some bard or minstrel decided to commit them to parchment or to paper. They were remembered. They were part of the heritage of oral tradition. And as the changing moods of human beings refocused man's attention upon other projects, these old fables seemed to fade away. Where they came from, really, is probably one of the literary mysteries of the West. There were hundreds of them, and in various forms and kinds they flowed through all the cultures of Europe. No source has actually been found. The only way we can trace them by following the footsteps wandering minstrel who carried the stories from one land to another, vanished in his time, and another took his place. So we begin to realize that there's some kind of an archetypal pattern behind this story of the world hero. It is not difficult to gain some insight into it. It's part of man's psychology. Each human being, mysteriously within himself, regards his own uniqueness. He feels himself to be different. And from this difference has come not only a great deal of progress, but a vast amount of tyranny. Man, possessed by the sense of destiny in himself, has become both benefactor and despot, pressed on by the relentless selfness that was greater than body, greater than life, greater than valor, really, and greater than the world. So we have always been plagued by these strange false heroes who grew strong and selfish and tore down the very good that perhaps they themselves had earlier built up. But man believes himself to be in some way a very powerful creature. We know. We do not really dare to contradict this vision. Locked within every human being is a greatness that he does not comprehend. In some way, each one of us, at least in the small world of our own affairs, must become the hero. We must save our own private worlds, or they will fall apart. But every individual has a responsibility to preserve, protect, and lead the small area where his influence is felt. On the other side of the world, this story of the hero takes on a number of rather esoteric implications. It's no longer pleasant folklore to be sung in the presence of assembled nobles at some festival of court. In the East, the hero of the world mingles his personality with the religion, the philosophy, the deepest metaphysics of the people. Along the caravan route through Tufan and San Juan, when the fires were built at night, the travelers were resting from the arduous journey of their caravan. Men gathered a little afraid under the strange dark night with its glittering stars. They were little people lost in a great world of sand and rock and mountain and desert. Only by some strange good fortune had they even found the oasis with its preserving water. So these men who lived forever on the brink of disaster and on the edge of danger gathered and told their stories and gave reports of various things. And along this stretch of road came into existence, so far as we can tell, the story of Gesar Khan, the hero of the world. We have tried to some measure to understand how this story accumulated. But even experts in the field have been able to accomplish very little more than those who have tried to trace the legendary of the West. No complete record or account of the great saga of Gesar of Lin is known to exist. It has been broken up, and fragments of it have become the treasures of countless storytellers. Estimates have been made. If all the known versions of this legend could be brought together, and enough storytellers, each who had a chapter or a section of his own, could be caused to put these together into one fabric, then these storytellers told their tales, each beginning where the previous one left off to make the saga complete. It is estimated that the narration of the story at the rate of speaking 24 hours a day would require better than 3 years. It is an enormous story. So the Asiatic, of course, has never had the attitude for condensation and abridgment with which we are favored by the Reader's Digest. In these lands, men did not desire to briefen their stories. The longer, the better. They loved to go into the most intimate details of every account, mingling prose with poetry, reliving, reenacting the minutest details of these legendary epics. And as a result, you may sit for several evenings while the storytellers unfold their beautiful tales. But even so, you will get only a tiny fragment of the greater work. Although printing was known in this area at a comparatively early date, as far as we can tell, no printed version of the Gesar was ever prepared in Tibet. There was an edition in China in the early 18th century under the patronage of the great Emperor Qinglong. All these copies, however, where they exist, are extremely rare. A few manuscripts are known. These also are almost as ephemeral as the circumstances which they set forth. There are two distinct stories or versions of the Gesar legend. One Mongolian and the other Tibetan. As might be expected, these vary in numerous details, but not enough to disrupt the essential developments of the theme. Each improvises from the central concept, adding wonderful embellishments that are measured by the hours that it requires to tell them. But the central heroic theme stands essentially the same in both traditions. It is now believed, in all probability, that the oldest form of the Gesar legend is Tibetan, and that the Mongolian version was derived from that. On the other hand, the very name Gesar suggests the Mongols. We have not as yet any clear understanding of the meaning of the name, and that is rather important, but is also quite an interesting aspect of the situation. Of course, the word Khan is comparatively easy. It is equivalent to the Western word prince or king. And it became the imperial title of Genghis Khan and his descendants. We may perhaps liken it to a form of emperor. It represented a ruler over rulers. And the highest form of it, of course, was the name that was given, or the title that was given to Genghis and Kublai Khan. They were called the Khans, or the kings of kings, the rulers over the rulers of the earth. Gesar presents more of a little mystery. We have no genuine root for it in the ancient languages of that area. And it seems to many scholars, and perhaps they are not too far astray, that it was derived from a Western word, perhaps the word Caesar, Gesar, Caesar, or the form which we find in the Teutonic culture, Kaiser or Kisa. This again might only mean another title of nobility, of rulership. So Gesar Khan might simply again mean the king of the kings, a proper term perhaps to signify the noblest of all mortals, the hero prince of the world. It is probable, according to some thinking, that like many legends, the Gesar Khan had some historical background. Perhaps there was a person in those old days when northern Asia was comparatively unknown beyond its own boundaries, where tribes had no solid records, where gradually tradition emerges largely as the result of the rise of Buddhism in Tibet, Nepal, and Mongolia. Until the Buddhists brought writing and a written language and began the classification of knowledge, these older tribes lived almost entirely dependent upon oral tradition for the preservation of their records. They were much like the American Indians, who also developed their hero myths, like the hero of legend of Great Rabbit, the basis of Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha. Be this as it may, the historical Gesar Khan, if he existed, was soon dissolved in myth. We have no way of estimating his time, although some feel that he probably could have existed or could have lived sometime in between the 7th and 9th century of the Christian era. As these dates emerge, we sort of raise an eyebrow a little bit, for it was at precisely that time that the great cycle of myths was developing in Europe. Actually, we would have the Gesar Khan almost a contemporary of King Arthur, or of Charlemagne, or of the mysterious heroes of the Grail. So whatever happened seems to have happened at the same time in two very distant parts of the world. The Khan word also comes back to us from our own Western Hemisphere, the hero of the Aztec Empire, the hero of the Maya people, is remembered through this ancient region as Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. And here in the West, the word Khan seems to signify serpent. But it is also true that whereas it signified serpent, the serpent in its own turn signified royalty, or signified the great wisdom, the priesthood, the supreme rulers of the state, the custodians of the secret lore and legendary of the people. The Gesar Khan includes a number of elements which are extremely reminiscent of the Western folklore with which we are better acquainted. Like all the other heroes of the world, Gesar of Ling was immaculately conceived. He was born, it is said, as the result of his mother drinking the pure water of a mountain spring from a bowl of yellow jade on which were inscribed the 8 emblems of Buddhist immortality. The coming of Gesar of Ling was heralded, was announced. There was a strange annunciation that accompanied his advent. For even then, it was assumed that he was looked forward to not only by men, but by the gods themselves. In the wonderful world above, in the Tushita heaven, where the Bodhisattva Maitreya rules supreme, it was affirmed or believed that the great powers and the great ones waited breathlessly for the embodiment of the Gesar Khan. Not that he was distinctly and strictly a religious avatar, for this is not the case. Rather, he seemed to be what we might call in Europe the defender of the faith. He was the hero warrior. He was the one who was to protect the truth down through the long ages of darkness. He was the servant of right, the vassal of the law. And just as the knights in Europe dedicated their swords before the altars of their faiths, binding themselves into a semi-religious order of chivalry, and just as this chivalry produced these perfected virgin knights like Sir Galahad, so it was believed that these wonderful, dedicated persons were not soldiers in the ordinary sense of the word. They were really defenders of God, some way protecting and guarding mankind through the long, dark centuries when virtue failed among men. It was necessary for some strange, mysterious order of life to protect those who could not protect themselves. Something of this lurks in the story of Gesar Ling. Prior to the time or advent of Gesar Khan, a very strange and wonderful man had gone from the University of Nalanda in central India up to the mysterious regions of the north. It is said that he was sent for because the wives of the king of Tibet were Buddhists and wanted the consolation of their faith in the great wilderness where they dwelt. And over this pilgrimage to bring truth beyond the great mountains was placed a general of the law, a great teacher, who is known today as the Blessed Guru, or the Wizard Guru, Padmasambhava, the founder, so to say, of Tibetan Lamaism, driving before him oxen loaded with books, carrying the sacred utensils of the faith, images for the altars, rosaries for the pious, carrying with him also the rudiments of knowledge. For it was said then, and has been said since, that when the Buddhists loaded up books on the backs of oxen to take them to a distant land, they placed the books of faith on one side of the ox, and the books of medicine, law, jurisprudence, science, art, and industry on the other side of the ox. They never went only with religious books. They took all knowledge that they could with them. For they realized, even back in the days of the glory of Nalanda, that you cannot bring religion to a people unless you can civilize them. Unless you can prepare within them a new appreciation of value, you can never bind them to an abstract faith. Well, the Wizard Guru took with him, among other priceless belongings, the thunderbolt scepter of the god Indra. He started out on a journey which no man had made before him, a journey across the top of the world, a journey into the mountains where, according to the earlier Hindu traditions, the gods dwelt, into those snowy wastes in the midst of which great Shiva sat, in sackcloth and ashes, a great mendicant. using his own life and his own soul as a hostage for the salvation of men. And here also in these remote places were demons, monsters, strange animals and still stranger men, animals that ate the flesh of each other and men that ate the flesh of men. And into this unconquered, unknown world of snow and height, of long winters and short summers, the blessed Guru made his way, finally crossing this incredible expanse of wilderness, surviving infinite hardships, and turning the thunderbolt dagger in one direction and another to destroy the demons that guarded the passes. Padmasambhava came finally to the court of the king of Tibet. Here he was kindly received. The mere fact that he had survived was itself the greatest miracle that he had performed. And Padmasambhava not only converted the king, but established the first temple or monastery to his faith. Here, under royal patronage, were carefully preserved the books that he had brought, and young men turned to study them under his help and guidance. He remained for some time there, until he was able to ordain monks and form a Sangha, or a brotherhood of the enlightened. In a few years that he was there, his wondrous thunderbolt performed one miracle after another. Human sacrifice ceased. Cannibalism ceased. The strange primitive beast deities of the wandering Tibetan nomads, although they were invisible like spirits of the air, were converted to the true faith by the matchless preachings of the wizard Guru. In every feat of magic, he surpassed the magicians. In every wonder and miracle, he was able to transcend the achievements of the shaman and all the other primitive witch doctors of that world. And in the course of things, he made the doctrine of the blessed law the central wheel upon which the turning culture of North Asia was to move from that time on. Finally, when he had completed all the works that he was supposed to do, he rose into the air, and with a chariot of followers, of singing musicians, of angelic beings, of saints and sages, not normally visible to men, he floated across the sky on his journey to another land which had called him, the island of Ceylon. We do not know much about the legend of the blessed Guru after his departure from the northern land. But we know that in the course of time, this legend came to be involved in the myth of the Gesar Khan. One involvement was, the first, that the blessed Guru Padmasambhava is reported to have announced the coming of the King of the world. In other words, he was the one who made the prophecy, who established the pattern. He was a kind of Merlin to this northern King Arthur. And as Merlin went to sleep in a mysterious sphere of glass, and there remained resting through the centuries, so Padmasambhava departed into Ceylon, where he is said still to dwell in the invisible regions of the atmosphere, performing the miracles that preserve his faith. Also, when the Gesar Khan was miraculously born, it was believed that a strange telepathy was set up. That Padmasambhava in far-off Ceylon was able to communicate by mind alone, to guard and to guide and to impress his thoughts and his will upon Gesar of Ling. Perhaps this was because when the child Gesar was born, he had a third eye in the middle of his forehead. Now, as third eyes are not especially fashionable, this circumstance caused considerable consternation. And in order that her boy might not suffer from such embarrassment, the mother is said to have closed the eye with her finger and prayed that it might not deform her otherwise handsome son. And the eye remained closed, but a little fold of skin remained. And there was a sensitivity in this eye which seems to tie to the concept of the urna or coil on the forehead of Buddha, and for that matter, the coiled serpent on the foreheads of the pharaohs of Egypt. The Gesar of Ling grew up like young Siegfried, a wonder of the world. He grew up in a strange region of nature, a wild, desolate nature. And even from the beginning, his powers and his abilities were remarkable and extraordinary in every way. And gradually, he became the Bishamonten, the guardian king of the Buddhist community in Tibet. He was their patron while he lived, and his patron saint, and their patron saint when he was gone. The exploits of his life were almost too numerous to mention. But certain points about him are perhaps worthy of consideration. First of all, in the North Country, both in the Mongolian and Tibetan versions of the story, two explanations are offered for Gesar Khan. The first, that he was a thought being, that he was fashioned by the mind of the law, that he was an apparition who appeared because of the power of universal mind focusing upon him. He was a shadow, a shade, a kind of projected ghost or image, that actually he was a thought, a tremendous thought, made visible by the intensity of the great minds that produced him. And here's a thought also. Perhaps the Gesar Khan was a thought arising in the minds of men. Perhaps his whole image is a thought form. Perhaps actually he was the long projection of convictions, the shadow of invisibles cast upon the substance of the earth. Perhaps he was really man's own dream, heroic, but always fallible. Always within this dream, some limitation, some restriction, some ineptitude, that in the end must turn it into a nightmare. The second explanation for the Gesar Khan is that he was the embodiment of a bodhisattva, that he was actually a kind of fortuitous incarnation, that the great meditating powers resting in judgment over the world could project themselves, taking on forms at will, inhabiting these forms until the purposes were attained, and then departing from them. Some of these legends tell us very frankly that Gesar Khan was a kind of special child, that in his infancy and youth he was himself, that he had embodied from the mysterious regions of the Tushita world, but that in the price and course of his embodiment, he had assumed the obligation that at a certain time and under certain conditions, he would turn over his body, renouncing it for himself and placing it at the disposal of one of the bodhisattvas. This being would then enter into it and perform its ministry or achieve its purposes by dwelling in the body of another. And then, when the time was finished, the bodhisattva would restore the body to the entity which had originally fashioned it. Now, this seems a kind of a strange belief, and yet what else do we have in the 3 years of the ministry of Jesus? We are told that a spirit descended upon him in the form of a dove at the baptism by John, and that this spirit departed from him at the time of the crucifixion. Why are we telling any essentially different story? It might be shocking to think of it that way, but at the same time, we have the courage to think it through. There are certainly parallels. How did these parallels come into existence? Did some strange account of Jesus reach this region through the Nestorian migrations? What was the way in which the various elements of the Gesar Khan were brought together? All we can say is that he was regarded either as a projection of mind or as the embodiment of a bodhisattva. One of the great beings in meditation sent his own mind and consciousness into the form of this lad and used this form to accomplish the preservation of the people. The next point that I think we have to bear in mind is that the background of Gesar Khan is also very closely tied with 2 other important elements. One of these elements is the mystery of Shambhala, the city of the gods. In the Tibetan legendary, particularly as we meet it along the old caravan routes, where the legendary is vivid, if not always entirely authentic, there is the belief that Gesar of Ling was one of the mysterious princes guarding the ramparts of Shambhala. Now, what is Shambhala? It is the city of the gods. Shambhala is the mysterious abode in the north. And in those desert days when the northern lights played in the cold hours of winter, it was believed that these radiances in the sky were flickering lights from the ramparts of Shambhala. Shambhala was the seat of the invisible government of the world. It was to Shambhala that the great arhats had gone. It was Shambhala that was the abode of the immortals. It was from here that the regent of Shambhala guarded and guided the destiny of the whole world. His was the invisible government which linked all nations, empires, states, and peoples together in a strange commonwealth of yoga. The second element that is involved in this interesting story is the school of the Kalachakra. And this is the mysterious wheel of destiny, the wheel of fire, the wheel of secret power. Kalachakra was a secret school which claimed to possess the mysteries of the 5 yogas. The Kalachakra was the central universal university, the abode of the great wisdom. The Kalachakra school spread broadly through Asia, with mysterious rites and ceremonies which we now associate with Tantra, and which survive in Japan in the Shingon-shu and the Tendai-shu, the 2 great Kalachakra schools which still flourish in Japan. This mysterious school was not a school of sorcerers or magicians or wizards, but it was the school of the skywalking men. It seems to have been very closely identified with the achievements of the arhats of Buddhism. For these arhats really represented rishis, or adepts, scattered over the entire surface of the earth. And upon them rested the responsibility of the preservation of man and the continuance of the doctrine until the coming or the advent of the Buddha Maitreya. It's interesting in the old writings bearing upon this to realize that there is a kind of strange fatality almost, like the tragedy of the Nibelungen in this story of the Arhats, or the ancient adepts. For the old writers tell us that these adepts, Chinese Lohans, remained and guarded and guided through the long, dark, deepening night of the Kali Yuga. But as they labored desperately to keep alight the mysterious flame of the doctrine, this flame ever flickered lower. Little by little, men turned from the law. We find in the old books the prophecies of times to come, while the Lohan or the Arhats watched, unable to change the course of destiny. They saw the great cycles of karma closing in upon human destiny. The old writings, they must sit in quiet meditation while worlds fall apart. The Arhats can only guide and save the truth seeker. They can only help those who are strangely and wonderfully dedicated. And it is written in one of the great books of the Arhats that wherever in the world men gather together for the celebration of the good law, wherever men unite to worship truth, to serve each other unselfishly, whenever a congress or a convention of the worthy and the noble takes place, wherever the holy ones gather to honor their faith, the Arhats, in some human form, not immediately recognizable, will be there. For they have the power to fly over the mountains, to cross oceans, to see into infinite distances. They know all the good that is going on in the world. But also there is a strange sadness, for they must know also the evil that occurs. And they were told at the time, it is said, that Buddha ordained them, that they should go forth to preserve the doctrine until the day when the next teacher should arrive. The concept here seems to have been borrowed very strongly from the Hindic point of view. For in the Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna saying, when virtue fails upon the earth, then I come forth. The Arhats knew that virtue was to fail upon the earth. One by one, all the lights of truth would go out. The flames would flicker low. Darkness would descend upon mankind. Ignorance would prevail. Viciousness would take over. The noble ideals would be perverted by selfishness and self-interest. Until in the end, those who were true to the law could be counted on the fingers of the hand. When this occurred, also the life of men would be shortened. A man would be very proud and happy if he lived 10 years. Everything would grow strangely dark. And then in that last moment, the Arhats in prayer would beseech the coming of the teacher. And then the Maitreya would come forth. He would descend from the Tushka heaven to bring with him the reformation of the world. Now into the Gesar Khan has been built much of this story. For the story of the Gesar Khan is indeed the story of the world losing the battle for truth. Heroically struggling on, fighting to preserve value, only to see value slowly, relentlessly disappear. But no matter how much wisdom and truth and beauty was expended, still the light would go out. And that the only answer lay in the waiting for the Maitreya. For in that desperate moment, when virtue failed, the Lord of the world would come. And when the Lord of the world came, the Arhats would go to sleep in nirvana. Their labor was done. Until then, like mysterious unknown wanderers, unrecognized, they would ever wander about the earth, trying to bring truth, trying to bring light. They would be embodied in countless forms, but always they were dedicated, lives ago, to the labor they would perform. In the story of the Gesar Khan, we see these factors opposed very dramatically. For against the hero of the world was raised the Mongolian equivalent of Hagan. Against him rose also the traitor knight of the Round Table, the traitor knight of the circle of Charlemagne, the betrayer. And this betrayer is present, of course, in the Gesar Khan story, working constantly to undermine the labors of the hero, resolved to destroy the great king in order that he might rule instead. Now, the great king is actually, of course, the law itself. Gesar Khan, therefore, becomes in one of his manifestations the eternal workings of the law of karma. He is the world king and the great king. He is the ruler of all that lives. He is the ruler that is betrayed. He is the ruler against which the adversary rises up, crying to the people, he is a false god. We realize the same thing in our Christian tradition. The betrayal of Christ. For on this occasion, Christ was accused of claiming to be the true King of the Jews, the true Son of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Therefore he was condemned because he was accused of claiming kingship against the kingdom of Herod and the kingdom of Caesar. These points are again paralleled in the Gesar. Here we have the world king representing the great pattern of the law, who has come with the greatest strength and power that man can bring to the salvation of his people. He comes to preach the true doctrine. He comes as the warrior of the law, probably somewhat parallel to the Japanese concept of Fudo-myo, the flaming, demon-like appearance of Buddha. He comes as the avenger and the defender. He comes to warn the world that no man can break the law and survive. But in this case, his enemies raised against him not only the fault of claiming temporal kingship, but ridiculed him as a pretender. I think we can see this working out in the story of man's philosophy also. How many today would believe, for example, in the immutable operation of rebirth and karma? How many would accept the fact that the universe is a great moral structure, a great ethical complex, that it is in truth and reality the absolute wisdom syndrome, that it is the self-sustaining, self-managing, all-governing power? How many would acknowledge that we are the citizens of a moral universe, and that we cannot with impunity break the rules and the laws? This was more or less the dilemma of the Gesar. For like universal law, he was ridiculed. He was ignored. Every effort was made to destroy his empire. It was the empire of truth. Everything was done to betray him, to pervert the law. Men claiming in their selfishness that there was no law, but their own ambition, turning to the law to destroy it in order that they could maintain a world of ignorance, superstition, and fear. Thus, his subjects, over-influenced by their temporal leaders, turned upon Gesar of Ling in the same way as the people of Jerusalem, aroused by the priests, turned upon Jesus. And those that had first glorified then cried out, "Crucify." This was paralleled very closely in the Gesar story, but with this one difference, that in the Gesar of Ling episode, the personality is very thin, and underneath it, the pattern of the meaning is rather obvious, more obvious perhaps than where we build a strong historical situation, which we are most prone to accept. But in the Gesar of Ling, the king of the law is, of course, the agent of Shambhala, the city of the law. Gesar of Ling was ordained in Shambhala to be the instrument and vassal of the law. He was therefore sent forth to defend the law, to be its hero, to preserve it against corruption, to strive for it, live for it, and if necessary, die for it. He was therefore the holy soldier. He was, as we say it in Europe so many times, defender of the faith. And yet the conspiracies rose against him. And in many instances these conspiracies would have succeeded had it not been that in the moments of greatest emergency, the apparition of Padmasambhava, the projection of the wizard teacher, came to him, counseled him, and gave him that Merlin-like instruction. Here we also almost see or sense the presence of Gudamund, the old knight of the Parsival cycle. Padmasambhava remained the instructor, the Merlin, the wise man, and in most instances was able ultimately to enable Gesar of Lin to achieve the purposes for which he had come into the world to fulfill. As time went on, of course, the great battle, which in the Nordic cycle ends in the Ragnarok, the end of the old world and the end of the world of the gods, closed in upon Gesar of Lin. He won all the battles, but he lost the war. He went on and on, struggling, striving, more and more enmeshed in the mysterious sorcery of circumstance. In a wonderful, mysterious way, he again parallels the problem of modern ethics. We speak of justice, but we are unjust. We speak of honor, but we are dishonorable. We talk of law, and then we compromise it. And thus we, in one moment, support Gesar of Lin, and in the next moment we betray him. All the intricate and wonderful happenings of this life are, to the Tibetan and Mongolian mind, proper subjects for infinite fabulizing. And we can see why this would be true. Any instance in human life, any circumstance in which any creature passes, could be one of the innumerable adventures of Gesar of Lin. Because Gesar, in this sense, is every man. It's the miracle play of that name. Gesar of Lin is our problems. The days we spend, the nights we walk the floor. Gesar is the little conspiracy which affects every one of us. For he is the image of our common problems. He is the image of our common struggle, our fight for survival against the closing pressures of adverse circumstances. Everywhere the hero struggles on, only to finally fall under the blows which he cannot survive. And the whole pattern is, of course, established by Buddha in the beginning. He told firmly that the doctrines would gradually vanish from the earth, that men would therefore have to wait with whatever patience their karma could provide until the advent of the next week. After having passed through all the adventures and vicissitudes of a very intensely diversified career, Gesar of Lin finally came to the end of the story. In one way or another, the world hero always dies. Because this is a Buddhist world hero living in a world of Buddhist conceptions, he would not die of the sword, nor would he naturally do so in the symbolism as it would apply to Eastern religion and philosophy. We find Gesar of Lin seated upon a rock, within four of those who had been true through all the ages, his four nearest and dearest friends. They sat together in meditation. Suddenly there was a great flash of light. The five disappeared together. All that remains
that if we look
was the
carefully,
rocks
we will
and
find
their
that
empty
close
robes.
to the wars that were
They had
fought
gone
at the beginning of the present
back
century,
into the mystery
wars
of
dominated
the
so
Shang
much
Shambhala
or
of which
justified.
they had come.
We have had
And
many
there,
wars
according to the legend, they still wait.
committed in the name
Wait
of
for the fulfillment of the end of the
crusades
prophecy,
into the Holy Land,
the cycle that must yet be fulfilled.
sacred site of Jerusalem, and
Now, the prophecy of the Gesar Khan goes on in this way. After it was obviously impossible to achieve at that time the fulfillment of the world's desire, a prophecy was given that the land would come under great evil, that one by one the houses of wisdom would be deserted or destroyed. Little by little the teachers would be persecuted. The monasteries would be empty. The books would be burned. And all that had been a great and wonderful world would return again to the desert from which it had come. And in the transformation, the keeping of the world would pass to the despot, to the false one, to those who reviled the law, betrayed it, and those who martyred its saints. And there would be a great and terrible darkness, a darkness of hopelessness. The body of the faithful would be scattered in many lands beyond the borders of the world. Early in the present century, the situation in Asia became increasingly acute. Travelers who visited not only Tibet, but traveled along caravan routes, men exploring like Roy Chapman Andrews, or seeking the mysteries of the old culture like Sir Orlstein. These men camped with the pilgrims, camped with the merchants on the caravan route. And as early as about the time of World War I, legends began to flow along the caravan route. Legends to the effect that a great crisis was coming, a crisis that men had never known before. And the oracles, the living prophets of Tibet, began to speak of these. And everywhere it seemed that the world was rushing on to catastrophe. A catastrophe greater than men had ever known. But the Mongol and the Tibetans seem to have a faith that we do not have. They seem to have hopes and convictions that have not sunk very deeply into the consciousness of Western man. But even these poor wanderers on the sand and under the stars have something of a deep, abiding faith in them. And the rumors kept coming along, the report that the great sessions of the immortals in the luminous palace of Shambhala, that the wise and the good and the noble of all the worlds were gathered there, that the builders of the 10 regions had assembled in solemn conclave in the mysterious house of the law, that this great light shone forever from the rampart, and the wind horses carried the messages to the other corners of the world. The report was that the time has come for the appearance of the King of the world, that he must come in a strange and wonderful way, like the baptizer of old, crying out, "Prepare the way of the Lord and make his paths straight."
Spirit of God
that
is something
the edict of the law was
into common words
that the great armies of the light
on language. That is the
were
reason
to
why
unite
the
against the armies of darkness, as
because
happened in Egypt,
we cannot
when the
overcome
hosts of Typhon finally came face to face
or infer.
with the sons of the Golden Hawk.
We therefore worship the
Here was the Armageddon.
not realizing
Here was the great war.
in spite
Here was the final alignment of good and evil.
there is only one creating
That
God.
they, in the vanguard of the army of the law,
There is no reality,
was to ride Gesar of Lynn,
and there is no escape
who had waited for a long
from
time
the divine purpose
for the
for
day.
which this world was fashioned.
And with him would ride
Created the world.
his generals and his captains,
They created all the
those who had waited patiently in the Tushita world for the coming of the King of the world.
One
And this
infinite
mysterious power
benevolence. One
was to ride forth with the armies,
existing always for the fulfillment of its own
and
purpose.
then beside the campfires men speculated
Unfoldment of
out under the Mongolian stars.
eternal deity.
What does this mean? How shall we interpret it?
Except
Why do we hear
for us to
that the
change
Gesar Khan
goes
is
on
about
so,
to return?
we are perfectly entitled
How do we know that he is to liberate us
to desire. But
from
let us
bondage?
try to achieve the
How do we
real
know that he is to plant the banners of the law upon the highest ramparts of the
under
east?
another name.
That his flag shall fly,
Mythology
and the red
in which
crested
all the gods in heaven fight
spears
all the nations of the earth.
with their yak-tail
No
pendants
fighting gods over the
would be
city
seen
of
again.
today as the deity
What is
of
this
the
secret army
walls of Troy.
that was to rise from the dust,
The law and his own
that was to be embodied
These
from the shadows of old
have
things?
been sanctified and
This
justified
secret army to be immaculately conceived,
to perpetuate misunderstanding.
to rise
To
finally
some degree at least,
as
nearly
the
all
protectors and the
permit
keepers of human destiny,
of some type of
the new order of chivalry.
misunderstanding.
Now, some of the Mongolians,
Differences in
Tibetans,
basic principles
the people of North India,
are treated.
and the Chinese of the 5 provinces,
No reality in
they were foolish people. They were not all ignorant
some ways.
camel drivers.
Of truth to carry
So
forward.
they could not just believe in a legend
And among all the
by which there would suddenly appear before them an army such as might have been raised 1,000 years ago by the banners of Genghis Khan.
of discovery,
They could not believe this type
heavens above us
of coming.
are not at war
There had to be
with
something
themselves
else.
as well as with the
The
other.
coming of the King of the
So
world
when we try to achieve this,
had to have a meaning
I think this probably
deeper
the best
and more valuable than this.
is to realize that there are 2 ways of
And so
finding
the
God. That is
speculation
the way
spread
by
into the philosophy itself in Japan, Korea, among the Buddhists of the Diamond Mountains,
for the individual.
even among the saints and mystics of Nepal, northern India.
He cannot find the security that
Speculation was brought finally into harmony
world around us.
with the teaching itself with which the whole project was involved.
We know perfectly well
The only answer that could possibly mean
not
anything
really
was
actually
that
believing what he says he
a
is.
host of
He
entities,
claims to believe that
souls,
he is part
would
of
come
one
into the
family,
world.
but he is just going to exert
This
his
host of souls would arise from a certain and peculiar
his
chemistry.
own activities, so
That in this desperate time,
he believes that we
the
should
patient ones,
so he doesn't marry.
the armies of the
We
Lord,
do every day, claiming
the
that there are
disciples,
that are real, but
whose
these
number
laws
was beyond
interfere
legion,
with the most important thing that we claim.
they would be the ones who would become the soldiers of the King,
The individual believes first
here, everywhere upon the earth,
to be
at a
himself,
certain time, and according to a certain law.
freedom upon those around
There would be an influx
him. Last analysis, the
of
only
enlightened souls.
individuality of which we are capable
These enlightened souls
we have
would be the
a
arhats,
mistake.
if we want to call them that.
realities, there is no freedom.
That incredible array extending beyond the power of vision
Why should you want to?
in the magnificent apocalyptical production of the lotus of the good Lord.
Because he has an unreality of his own
These
to cherish.
would be the awakened
He
ones,
wishes to do as he please in a world
in whose nature the seeds of eternity had been sowed.
we see around us today.
For it was said, or believed,
Of
and the old Jataka tales of the embodiments of Buddha carry the same message.
and we also see
Believe that in the course of ages, in the vast cycles of time which have preceded our present day, in every
now
generation,
we realize that there's another end.
seeds of truth
and that
fell
is
into the souls of men,
world conflict in
beauty
germicide.
and of hope. These are the bija or bija
which we
seeds,
can
the
manufacture
seeds
to
of Buddha.
destroy each other.
The Buddha is nothing but a
It should
personification
sober somebody.
of the world truth.
It should represent
Now into the souls of men fell these
destroy
little
himself and his world.
soul seeds.
Now all of this is not really due to the
And
fact
some of
that
these
God
seeds
is bad.
fell upon sterile ground and they died.
To the fact that some
And some of these seeds fell into fields and the birds of the air devoured them.
it is simply due to
Some of these
certain
seeds
basic
fell upon
attitudes
good soil
which the human being has
grew
carried with him to
and
the
multiplied
beginning of his existence.
in a
He has
wonderful
been
way.
warned of a million times.
For there is nothing greater or more wonderful than the multiplication of the
These
mustard seed.
mistakes invariably and inevitably
So those in whose souls the seed of the law had been planted,
but he never realizes that he
in their various embodiments, were not aware of this.
can kill them.
They have no
In other
knowledge of
words,
it.
if we wish to survive as a
The
world,
mind
we've got to stop
that awakened with birth did not tell them of the old seed.
self-satisfying way of
Seed was in the heart,
we have now
and in
followed.
this it was good seed.
We cannot keep on watching.
And in the hearts of these,
we cannot
there
keep
gradually
on watching
developed
all
or
the
unfolded the
and
tree of the
learning
soul,
nothing from them. And
as
under
mentioned in the
temptation,
mysticism
doing the same
of
thing
Sami.
The time
There is much of this
to
same
discover
concept hidden in the writings of
value
Meister
in
Eckhart.
our own nature and do something
Those in whose
about it,
souls
and
the
then we're going to be able to
seed
build
had
the
found
new
good
world
resting
that we
place,
so gravely hope to find.
experienced transformations which they did not
Start
understand.
a new attitude.
In a
of
wonderful
value.
way, they became
Now, what
what
we
the Bible might
really
call the salt of the earth.
we need is what most
They had within them
socialist countries
a great
now
power,
they are
gradually
discovering
growing
that
up,
without ideals,
the power
they are going to go down.
to serve and to know and to
So-called
sacrifice
successful,
for truth.
communistic
They
states
became
are
the
in
great
desperate trouble.
Constructors.
And the only thing that
Wow,
can take
world.
them out of trouble is the thing
They are the
that
ones who gave us the laws.
creative ideals,
And in Buddhism,
dedication to principle.
all the great
Principles they
teachers
try
of
to
the world
dedicate themselves to
are the ones in
so
whose
far
heart
down on the list of
the good
reality
seeds
that
had
they
been
could not
planted.
possibly accomplish the end.
Buddhists would not hesitate
Therefore, we
to
now
say that
find
Pythagoras or
actually,
Plato
on all levels, a
or
bankruptcy
Michelangelo
of
or
material.
Leonardo were all
With it, the bankruptcy
the
of
ones
all
in
the
whom the
economic,
seeds had been
profit
planted.
abuse.
They didn't
All
know
these
it,
things are here.
but something in them
Notice.
longed
We've got
for
to do
beauty.
something about them. If we
Something
want
in
to
them
move
sought
forward
justice,
to the 21st century, we've
sought a
got
better
to
way.
survive.
Then these
All
seeds
now
sprinkled
into
so
our lives,
freely
into our world, small children
also
must
fell
face
into
this.
humble hearts,
We may be with them for a
into
while,
kindly people
but the world
who never
will
achieved
inherit
distinction,
the substance of our mistakes.
but who lived every day a little more kindly than their neighbor,
Rather than a legacy,
more ready to sacrifice,
decay, and pain.
more easily brought to realize
Our religion.
the beauties of wisdom,
Recognizing
more ready to develop the eternal emotions which alone are justified: compassion,
constructive belief.
appreciation,
He has to make a
realization.
statement to himself. He has to
These
live, and he has to live.
were the army of the light.
He has to either believe
For in the great
the
emergency,
principle of good,
the light
or
was in them.
does not believe that.
And in the day of the return of Gesar of Ling,
Consequences of that
he would call forth the light in the soul. He would see in the souls of all those who possessed it the flickering flame of the doctrine. In some strong and in others weak. But they are his army. The army of those who refuse to die, who refuse to give up beauty, who have died perhaps 100 deaths of pain, but will not die. Each time they come back, the little jewel shines more brightly, the blessed symbol of the blessed Lord. So these thoughtful say, in humanity itself, these people, these souls, perhaps they are nearer to us than we realize. And perhaps that same light is in our own souls. But if this be, then we are banded together to form the army of the Hashepti, the sons of the light. In a certain time, when otherwise things would fail, these would be called, and out of space they would come in a great army to be embodied. When they are born, they would not have the slightest idea of their destiny. It would all be wiped out, as it was wiped out of the mind of Gesar of Ling. But these could not refuse their destiny. When the time comes, they will be reminded in a mysterious way of the duty they are here to perform. And when the word reaches them, they will awaken. That is, they will awaken within themselves. This does not mean that they may necessarily still know why they were born. But they will know that they were born, and that this call is the most important thing that has ever come to them. So they will rise and follow in the way of the call. The call itself, of course, is a strange projected phantom, this embodied bodhisattva, Gesar of Ling. He symbolizes the awakener. When he arises and speaks, when he gives the great battle cry from the ramparts of Shambhala, then those who are waiting will rise with him. They will instinctively and inevitably become the army of light. For this they were born, whether they know it or not. For this they have lived countless lives, whether they remembered them or not. For those who form this army are the ones that somewhere, sometime, vowed that they would discover the truth. And all that living which they have passed through has had a strangely refined something about it, because they were born each time with this instinct for reality. But otherwise we cannot tell them. But we do know that in this world some men live for power and others for kindness. Some seek worldly honors and others reject it. Some feel that success is everything, and others choose quiet lives of learning. No one knows just why, but it is in the karma of these beings. It is in the core of them. For in some are the soul seeds shining more brightly than in others. In that day, something has to happen, by which, in a single moment, those who have received the call and have become embodied as the sons and daughters and children of a generation will suddenly hear the voice of leadership. They will hear the mysterious order,
All of these things
which in the echoes of ether and in the mystic vibrations of things
it's trying to let inner
comes
space
forth
conquer outer
in the
space.
heart of the Kala Chakra.
Inner space is soul. It is the
They know that the time has come to turn the wheel of
soul
destiny,
in the planet, in the sun,
and they will rise, and no army on earth can defeat them.
and in the beast, and in the
Now, what will be the kind of war that will be led
there is a power
by
of
the
life
hosts of Gesar
struggling to fulfill itself.
Scholars tell us, and the old yogins who have knowledge
There
of
is no
these things,
principle of evil.
that this will be no bloody warfare.
Misusing good.
This will be a strange, fatalistic war of light.
The greatest abuse of all.
In this war,
So we're trying to get ready
there will be no way of telling
we've got to
friend and enemy.
one of them
from
is
the
we've got
outside.
to get spiritual
They will
value.
mingle together.
We've got to find ways.
There will not be any definite
that materialism
battlefield.
is the security
But there will be a rising of principle against compromise.
or ignoring.
There will come forth a strong, powerful urge
Fear with the victory of corruption.
to make straight
We do not think of it,
the way of the Lord.
but we know that if an individual
And one by one, the despots will find their followers falling away from them.
to corrupt those principles.
They will not
Therefore, we need some kind of
who have
idealistic teaching
the
to
dedication.
bring to us.
From the outside, it may seem all a strange.
In many nations,
Freaks of
this does
circumstance.
exist to some degree.
No one perhaps will know why it all happened.
It is all being
But the
sacrificed.
cry or the voice of the great generalissimo of the world,
It is not certain, and the defense is
Gesar
impossible.
of Ling,
Therefore, we are just drifting along
can be
nearer and nearer
the voice of a great leader.
that we do not really want to face
Who knows?
or ignore the problems involved.
When
So we need
the Orient first became aware of Western history,
proper thing for young people.
and they heard the story of Abraham Lincoln,
This is one of our ways of escaping
it was commonly agreed that he was a
The more
Buddha.
laws we pass, the more corruption we have.
Whether he knew it or not wasn't
We do
important.
not have a
All
law
of them do
to
not.
teach young people how to live.
Within himself, somewhere, sometime long ago,
Of parents.
the
It is
seeds
the
of light
small
were
child
sown.
learning from those who
For this light he lived.
learning to
If he
live
faced
right
with
from
this
parents
light, he
who live
died.
right. This is the only way it
He
can
was,
be.
in
No matter
all
how much
Eastern way of
there is
thinking,
corruption and,
one of the Arhats,
and integrity,
one of the
parents
great
may
teachers
have.
of the law.
There is no social order.
It wasn't
to
important
correct
whether he knew it or
the young
not.
person.
For it is only from the inside of things that you can tell.
With the individual.
It is only those who have the inner eye that can know
In a very great statement.
the plan that moves behind the face of things.
Is more secure. than
But this was the
integrity
point under
of the
consideration.
There is no nation
That
that
when the
is
great
than the most corrupt.
flying sky horses carried their messages to all parts of the world,
Correction here.
some would hear and know.
Comenius,
When the banners of Shambhala were unfurled, and the great Tibetan tankers showed the king of Shambhala stepping down from his throne,
system is a kind
it
of
meant
graduate institution.
that the day was near.
The child goes for
No
a
one knew how near.
having received the basis of
No one knew when
before
the great betrayal, the great crisis,
where
in the moment when,
the parent doesn't
according to the Hindu belief,
know. The parent hasn't.
man reaches an extremity
The child's children.
which his wisdom is not great enough to assist him
So
to
the first
meet.
line of defense against
That moment,
disintegration,
the Lord of the world comes forth again.
This is one of the great problems we have to
Now we begin to sense,
We've got to start with
even at our
before
present
they
day,
go.
the coming of this extremity.
And we cannot do it by
We
legislation.
realize that
We cannot put a policeman.
not only are we
outside the
confronted with a
guard
great
the law.
international
We
struggle,
cannot demand these things from
but that the
parents.
struggle is coming onto our streets, into our homes,
Therefore,
into our hearts.
The integrities of this level,
The forces are arrayed strangely as though on a battlefield.
basic values of
There are no boundaries to this battlefield except boundaries of thought and ideals and principles.
The beginning of the child's growth.
Here we have
When he goes into school,
a knight-errantry of nobility, striving like the Arthurian knights
how to live,
against the strange
how to die.
monsters of corruption.
In school, the child
All this we see.
at basic
We do not know how far it goes.
toward values,
But for some reason along the caravan routes, men knew it was coming. We didn't know, but they did.
of its world.
We thought we were going blissfully on our way,
There has to be
building a great material culture
be any in life.
that would bring heaven to earth.
Now we get to the point, perhaps.
But instead of doing so, it is threatening to bring hell to earth.
Perhaps this child is already on its
We are no longer secure in these things.
propriety, simply on the
But we
basis
see in Asia itself the rising of this great
we
turmoil.
have another problem. That
We
of
were told long ago that the day would come when Tibet would be ravaged,
employers have
when its holy ones would be destroyed, when its saints would be martyred, when its people would be scattered.
integrate the characters
But it would suffer also a
the
diaspora,
individual who works
by which
the business
an innocent
itself being
people would be
dishonest or dishonorable.
cast to the winds.
Simply adding
The
to
Tibetans
the-
believed this.
and that
They knew it was coming.
adding to
They
the-
saw it in the portents of the stars and the rattling of the oracle bones.
and
They
become
knew it was
more
coming.
mature in thinking.
So
All this, the
they also, by the same prophetic quality, made a kind of analogy that is very, very interesting. It's always interesting to find some small group of ethnic structure, some comparatively slight and fragile nation, likening itself to the whole world,
We have it in society.
seeing in its own destiny the destiny of humanity, and in its own salvation the salvation of all other men. Tibet had this
All
also.
of which at the present time is in a
And
miserable
this they shared with the Eskimo. For the Eskimo believes that ultimately he will rule the
do
world.
not have the strength
There's a long way to go, but he may make it if present trends continue.
they will get the job and then be
To
convicted
Tibet,
a few weeks later.
their own country was a microcosm of the
No
whole.
answer in this. The answer
The disasters that happened to them were disasters paralleled in all other nations.
we cannot
To them, the preservation or restoration of Tibet
we will not only get
became a symbol of the restoration of the whole world.
place another person in jeopardy.
To them, therefore,
Them suffer and perhaps
their present catastrophe is a symbol of world catastrophe.
So this is
They are a little
the answer is very
symbol
definite.
of a great injustice.
That within ourselves
They are the small, helpless victim.
to make reality
But
just
we
as
shall
we
know what day
make disaster.
each one of us shall be a small, helpless victim.
Style of doing it wrong.
But Tibet has been long touched
The infinite power.
by the grandeur of a
We
concept,
must call upon this power
concept
more and more.
of the Mahayana school.
Do not try to change.
According to the Tibetan, there are certain things we have to always remember.
Get inside of yourself.
That all these disasters that arise through the perfect working of the
How
law.
to get out of it and remain the
Tibet,
same.
at one time, tried to conquer the
How to
world
correct the situation
in military means.
never return.
It had a vast domain, no bearing upon its present state.
Now, as we come on to the
The old
educational
Tibetans
system,
say,
we go into all of the
those
other
that
practices,
were the days when we conquered
and
by
we
the
come
sword.
upon another dimension of religion.
These are the days
Very big,
when we are conquered
very
by
definite,
the sword.
very useful to us. And
The
that
old wheel has to
is
turn.
the power
That
will
which
give
lives
the
by
character
conquest
to do an 8
dies
day's
in the
work
hands of the
properly.
conqueror.
A religion will give
But it does
the
not die
individual
utterly.
to realize his
Nature does not destroy
to be true
to reprimand.
if it is a
Nature does not
he
take
doesn't get out of it.
the human soul and cast it into perdition because that soul has karma upon it.
An honest worker,
No, it is washed away by
an
pain,
honest member of the community.
washed away by suffering and by compensation.
But the individual must be
And as a result of
under
that,
the control or under the direction
there shall rise
of
again that which is good and true and beautiful in all
Well,
things.
most of the mystics have come
The gods themselves, according to Buddhism, cannot change the course of karma.
suffering, privation,
They fall under it
they've all
as well as
come
mortals.
to
But
martyrdom.
karma in itself has only one end,
But it is
the
easy
salvation
to
of all that lives.
And while the little happened
Therefore,
on the island,
peoples go down, cultures perish, men go to the grave, but the great plan goes on. And this great plan is toward a better kind of world than we have ever known. A world in which the growth of the truth seeds in ourselves will finally bring about the brotherhood of mankind. And Gesar of Ling is the soldier of this war.
We must find the fact.
He is the one into whose keeping is this strange pattern of retribution. He is the agent of karma. He must bring things to the destiny that they deserve. But all the time, he is fighting for the light. He is the armed warrior seeking for peace. He is the general who knows that it is the first duty of the general to prevent a war. In this symbolism, the two steps then become obvious. It is Gesar of Ling that must clear the way, must lead to the victory of right over wrong, must restore the great structure of the law, like the Krishna in his earliest embodiments. He must dive into the ocean of darkness and preserve the Veda, or the light of the law, from the darkness of the Kali Yuga. So Gesar of Ling is the fighter. He is the one that must bring these things about, who must gradually force the karmic pattern into its proper relationship with truth. When he has accomplished this, he will then lead his armies and his generals, and they will line up in great files of glory before the ramparts of Shambhala. And they shall bring their glory to the King of Kings, to the great Arhat of the color.
But when it gets up to this stage,
he then shall Gesar the Khan say,
into heaven than a camel
I
from the eye of an
have
needle.
prepared the way.
We've learned from the scripture.
Not by bloodshed,
There is a needle gate, and was in
but
Jerusalem.
by forcing
That gate was
the
so narrow that if a
clarification
camel
of
went
principle.
through, it had to take off its load.
My armies have risen against
Follow,
compromise.
listen. The camel
We have
could
been
get through,
tired
but what
of
it had
fighting
carrying with it
wrong.
could not.
There came into the world those who rose against evil and overthrew it, rose against corruption and cast it down, rose against tyranny, and tyranny is no more. Then, according to the ancient legends, the kings of the world, the great Arhats of Shambhala, will prepare for the next great cycle. In that time, they shall announce the coming of the Lord Maitreya. This is the body of the legend. Now, the thought of the thing is very important, I think. How shall we ever be able to solve the problem we see around us every day? The only answer probably that is possible is that at the appointed time, the great army of souls held in suspension behind the veil of life will move into embodiment together. If this happens at any time, then the generation that follows must be greatly altered. Then ulterior motive will not find its victim. For these dedicated souls will not be lured by the hypnosis of evil. They will not be corrupted by selfishness or self-centeredness. The moment we produce a powerful army of the incorruptible. Corruption is gradually destroyed. So the Gesar Khan legend means to the Tibetans and the Mongolians that an army of souls waits to be born. And when the trumpet sounds, they will be born. And when they do come into the world, they will be the soldiers of the guardian king. They will be the soldiers of the great law keeper, the guardians of the temples and the sanctuaries, the Neo and the Tenno, all of the strange and wonderful symbols of the protectors of the inevitable. For each of these guardians stands at one of the four directions of space and is obligated to see that the great wheel is never destroyed, to protect value, that the valueless shall never triumph. And the Tibetans and Mongolians believe that this is the way, and that the moving into the human race of these wiser souls is the answer. Under normal conditions, these wiser ones are assumed to come in, one here, one there, according to the needs of times and places. But when the need is universal, when problems are no longer limited to nations or races or small parts of the earth, but the problems are the whole earth, then they cannot be solved by one entering here and another there to find the ear of a thoughtful ruler. Now the great legions of the Arhat, described in the Lotus Sutra, extending as far as the eyes can see, in every direction of space, these legions fade out of the heavenly world and are born as infants, to grow up, to pass through all experiences that we know, but to have within them the priceless treasure of the flaming jewel, by which in their own hearts they can never be corrupted. These are the armies of light. These are the soldiers of Gesar of Ling. And in the light of this, I think the whole story takes on a very dramatic and rather inspiring aspect. And perhaps you will find it worth thinking about. Thank you very much. Wonderful legend of the Volsungs, or Siegfried or Sigurd, the hero of the world. And in Western culture, I suppose, the most complete expression of the folk hero was Siegfried. Here we have the man of destiny, a human being upon whom depended even the fate of the gods. For it was through Siegfried that Wotan hoped to restore the reign of the celestial beings over the earth. The word hero, as Sigurd or Siegfried, was immortal in several ways. He was strong, he was wise, he was possessed of wonderful insight, he could speak the language of birds and animals, he could slay the great dragon that guarded the treasure of the Nibelung, and yet he was strangely fallible, for in almost every instance the hero died. The hero perished by betrayal, by assassination. by the corruption of his followers. Always there was the vulnerable point, the vulnerable spot. Always there was the heel of Achilles. In the case of Siegfried, he was drugged into forgetfulness by his own wife, leading to the final act of this great saga or drama, in which the whole hope of the gods and of men. But along this same road later, Nestorian Christians, seeking to escape the persecutions of their more orthodox brethren, fled into the wilderness and reached Peking in the 2nd or 3rd century of the Christian era. So while the going was hard, the road was dangerous, it was heavily traveled. But perhaps this thin thread of communication explains a great many mysteries relating to the parallels between certain cultural practices of Europe and Asia. We know that in seeking for the origin or the beginning of certain rather common stories and traditions, we are defeated. We do not know where this great structure of legendary began. We do not know whether certain accounts were carried from Europe to Asia or from Asia to Europe. We do know, however, the same stories rose in both areas. But perhaps it is better and wiser to believe the Silk Road and the caravan route is the bridge that in those times bound the two hemispheres of the earth together. In any event, about the 5th century A.D., something was added to the pattern of world legendary. At this time, there began to emerge the dim shadow of the world hero. This world hero was something different from the traditions that had come down from earlier times. In Egypt, we know that the gods fought in the sky above the armies of the pharaohs. We know that in Greece, Athena guarded the city, of which she was the patroness. There were many accounts of divine intercessions, spiritual beings coming to the aid of men. These accounts, however, are rather different in spirit from those that rose somewhat later. But about the 5th century A.D., we began to see the rise of the concept of man as hero. That the hero of the world was not a divine being, but in some way an immortal mortal, a demigod, bound strangely to the earth and to the human background of things, yet rising above this mortal heritage to some strange and awful destiny. Perhaps the most simple approach to this is to tell something of some of these world heroes and what they meant in their own time. Most of them were associated with a line of literary production that paralleled Scripture, but was never quite scriptural. We have the Nordic sagas, study of the map of Asia will reveal that vast, comparatively unexplored area which extends to Chinese Xinjiang and Turkestan, across an incredible wilderness, desert, finally end in the Nejd and Hejaz, what we call today Saudi Arabia. This distance to ancient man must have been an incredible mystery. We know that 7th and 9th centuries A.D., Chinese scholars and monks crossed this vast expanse. Some of them were gone 12 years on the journey. And there was very little in this uncharted wilderness of comfort or security or even hope of survival. But by this long and dangerous path, the silk of China was brought to gladden the hearts of the pharaohs of Egypt and to make fine raiment for the emperors of Rome. It was interesting to realize that in this great region with rare oases, a kind of route was set up with posting stations. Every few hundred miles was a village or some place of rest. In most cases, the goods was unloaded in the backs of camels and given to another section of the caravan to carry on. Those who started in China were not likely to reach North Africa. But they did this entire process by relays. But along this same mysterious road, a certain exchange of ideas occurred. The various stations were eager of news. They lived alone, far from the unfolding processes of world civilization. They wanted tidings of the great civilizations that skirted their desolate path. And by degrees, the communication was certainly established between Peking, Constantinople, Alexandria, and possibly Rome. This communication line was very thin and was broken many times.